So we have here an imaginary 10 buckets that are in the proportions that are on your handout and that are in the slideshow. And we have a lot of manure, so this is going to be hot. That's 25% manure, that'll be good. And so all we need to do is just start pouring stuff in here. We've got this beautiful pig fence cage here. Oh, there's more.
Yes, there's more.
Oh, great. Food waste is 30:1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, so it goes in with the green stuff when you're figuring out what your proportions are. And this is all by guess and by gosh. It's not, you know, we're not weighing these things precisely or anything. So I think we want to put some brown stuff down first. Somebody want to pour a bucket of that in? Let's put 2 buckets down there. Is that?
This is our aeration.
It's hopefully.
Yeah, if I can make a comment there, critical if you don't want to hurt your back when you're turning the pile, is you keep these guys even a little bit smaller than some of these. If they're like this, it's a lot easier because then you can always fork that much. If you got a bunch of longer pieces, it mats, and then you're trying to lift something, it'll torque your back pretty fast.
Okay, so we could have a scoop here and put a little bit of manure on there, but let's put some green stuff in, something like that.
So what are those branches or pieces of wood? What are they?
Mayor?
Yeah.
What were the stalks?
I pulled a lot of like woody growth from last year out of my garden, and it was just sitting in a pile for a while. And I thought,
it's fresh.
Perfect.
It's
Composting workshop.
really fresh.
So it's a Jerusalem artichoke from last year, like the woody growth, and some old like echinacea and lemon balm stems and oregano.
So they're not branches of trees?
They're not. They're just like woody stems of herbs and perennial flowers.
Like
that we're
okra
growing.
plants, the big
Yeah,
okra
just
plants.
perfect.
This is cow manure?
This is
Yeah.
cow manure.
Cow plop.
Dairy
Green
cow
it
manure.
is. It's great. It's gorgeous. If you like that sort of thing. We used to go dig manure.
Well, if you're trying to make manure, I mean compost, it's pretty like this stuff. Otherwise, it's not too exciting. You're trying to
You
make
were
compost.
suggesting, someone was suggesting the possibility of using mash instead of the manure, or in
Yeah, you
combination
probably
with
could.
the
It's
manure.
pretty darn high protein, which is high nitrogen.
Would it heat up as much as manure would with
No, she
mash?
said
Would
the
you
whole
use about the
bucket
same quantity
or not?
or
I don't think
differently
so.
with mash?
Okay, you're good with that? So something to know, if you're trying to figure out how much things will heat up and stuff, you can take any of this stuff and take a sample and send it to the NCDA lab, and they will test it for you, and you do a waste analysis, and they'll tell you what the carbon nitrogen ratio is, and that'll tell you, you know. I'm suspecting that the manure is a little bit higher nitrogen. Where we get our spent grain, they actually are recycling the beer through it to get as much protein out of that beer as possible, because protein causes cloudiness in beer. So it's got a lot of protein in it. It's actually iffy animal feed because of that. There's too much protein, you know, and not much of anything else.
Success with using just the mash and no manure?
I haven't tried because we have both, you know. But I think you could probably do it. You have your own secret weapon anytime you need more nitrogen, and that's your own urine, you know, which if stored now, I mean, I'm finding it everywhere. They're all kind of agreeing. If it's stored for a month at 68 degrees, the pH changes and the pathogens that are in it, if there even are any, which there probably aren't, can't survive. So that's.
Could you have it higher than 68 degrees?
I would assume so. I wouldn't get so high that you'd suppress life, but I'd assume that if it gets up to 75 or something, it'd just go faster.
Run that again, Patrick. Okay, I'm into urine, but you're saying if you store your urine for more than a month,
At 68.
then what? Then it
The
becomes.
pH changes and it doesn't support the pathogens that could be in there, which are only salmonella and some tropical diseases. And actually, composting will probably take care of them anyways, but we're all tight about that stuff, so if you want to be sure, you know. But it's a great source of nitrogen if you're if you can't get manure and you don't think your grain is hot enough, your own pea will do a great job, you know. In fact, if I'm soaking my carbon and I'm doing a home pile, I don't do any of that here because of the cootie factor.
Yeah.
If I'm soaking a pile, I'll soak my stalks in urine, and then, you know. I used to anyways. Now I don't know if I will because I want the fungi to grow more. I don't want the carbon to go away very fast, you know.
So I was at doing some testing. People were bringing in samples and at a farmer's market, and one guy came in and I saw the biggest piece of fungus I'd ever seen. It was like 7 or 8 microns across, and it was huge. It was 200 microns long. And I rhapsodized about this for a while, and he was very happy. And he went away, and then he came back, and he said, I guess I should tell you that I pee on the compost pile. So I was going to...
Would you pile?
And that's why the fungi.
Another word with regards to the testing, if you're trying to figure out what exactly your carbon nitrogen ratio is, it's pretty confusing how much carbon is in these stalks. I mean, I've been wanting to have more carbon, make it a slower composting to try and let the fungi happen. And we tested all of our tomato, pepper, sunflower, cucumber vine stalks, and I was assuming we'd be someplace like around 70 or 80 at least. It was all below 60. Lots of it was in the 40s, which is not real different from hay, which is not carbon at all. Hay is basically nitrogen. Yeah.
You think that's because you dried them, Margaret? Because I mean, like
If you dry them,
that she dried her stalks have been dead and dried for a bit.
Yeah, no. If they're not dry, they'll have green in them and they'll be way high nitrogen.
Yeah.
They got to dry.
I mean, is there some time factor in that drying period?
They had lots of time to dry.
Yeah.
They weren't used until summer, and they were tested in mid-spring. You know. So I just think that, you know, these stalks might be higher because they're woodier, you know.
And they're pretty dry, so I'm actually watering them here.
We could be watering. We have, I mean, just use a finger on it. We have a hose. We just...
All right, how long is this going to be here?
Not at all. We're going to throw it in the other pile.
Okay, just pretend it's being sprayed with a light spray of water, because this stuff is awfully dry. It's not going to break down.
We would have sprayed a bit with each layer,
They don't
Jane.
come out of the cow looking like that.
There's some cows. Yeah. What happened to the kitchen scraps? Is that the kitchen scraps?
Actually, you know, if we're not going to do anything, let's just show those and not dump them in.
Show them and not dump them.
Not dump it because that's going to bring rats around like crazy.
So what is that?
That's food waste. Yeah.
Okay. And
That's
what is
food
the
waste.
white stuff?
The white stuff is flour that had moths in it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so
And that stuff, that'll really help with the heat up because that's really fine. It's high protein, you know. Yeah.
I have a serious question about food waste. So we all have food waste every single day, and most of us probably started initially composting because we wanted to use our food waste. But if we're doing the process that we've been taught today, that's not a daily use of our food waste.
High praise to the worm box. I mean, you just get EM and you just
where do I
saturate
get
it
the
on
worm box?
rice bran and stuff like that. You don't have to buy there.
What is the worm?
where do I get a worm box?
Well, I recommend, actually, you can buy all kinds of expensive plastic ones, but I recommend you get somebody to make you one out of rot-resistant wood, ideally locust.
Okay.
You know, we can show you the ones we have, you know.
Yes.
And there's two of us, and we eat a lot of vegetables. If you eat a lot of vegetables, you have a lot of waste, you know. It's high water waste. It breaks down pretty fast, but you have a lot of waste. And we, for years, got away with a 1 foot by 4 foot square bin. And once I realized we could have a little more capacity and not have to sometimes be backed up, never for very long, we went with a 1 foot by 6 by 4. And that's all it takes for us. The downside is if you don't have a heated garage that doesn't freeze or something, they're going to stop in the wintertime, you know. And we would just basically store stuff till summer. I had a composting bin system where I made compost in probably late February, and it heated up and it warmed my seedlings, so I didn't have a problem storing food waste because I used it all when I made that compost. Most people, though, problem is if you store it all through the winter, you're going to need another box when it warms up just to take care of what you stored. So you might need 2 boxes.
So where do you inoculate it with some worm?
You can buy red wigglers or any number of other so-called hybrid worms, but if you go to any pile of carbon, manure pile of weeds or something like that, and you pull the stuff away, you'll find the right worms in there. You cannot collect the ones that are in the garden. They're night crawlers. They're not pile worms. You want the pile worms.
Yeah, those little red ones.
And they wriggle a lot. They move a lot. Yeah, that's what you want. And you don't need very many. They're hermaphrodites and they reproduce really quickly. You know.
What is about coffee grounds?
Coffee grounds are great in a worm box.
Okay.
Yeah, excellent. It kind of adds to the bedding.
But not in the compost?
Oh, they're fine in the compost bin too. I value them a lot. You know, I use them as a mulch, and I use them, you know, a thing that's not widely known is if you mulch with them, it tends to keep slugs away. Caffeine is toxic to slugs.
I've started using it because I have I was hoping I wouldn't, but I've always had a problem with sow bugs, roly-polies. eating my flowers. And since I moved, I've been putting coffee grounds around my pansies and things that are getting eaten overnight. It's not slugs, but the slugs too. And it does whatever it does. It protects them. They don't like it.
Supposedly the rinsing of a coffee jar sprayed on a slug will kill it. So it doesn't take much at all. So I would probably, not a lot of coffee grounds ever get to a thermal pile for us. I also mulch blueberries with them. They got lots of other uses. They're definitely weed-free, pathogen-free. I mean,
Grow mushrooms on them.
Yeah, grow mushrooms on it. Yeah, there's just lots of other uses. But you can use, I mean, there's nothing wrong with putting them in there. In fact, if you do it right, if you get the right heat up, all that stuff about what you can put in a pile, really lots of fat and like high salt stuff or stuff that's been like, had a lot of dish soap on stuff or something like that. That's really all I try and keep out. The fat will smother worms and smother life, Though actually, interestingly, Jane, Jimmy Elizondo, who was doing our operation in Florida, he purposely put fish on his pile because he wanted the fact, because he had learned that it caused higher fungi, and he got pretty high fungi in that pile. There was a pile that I never would have made the pile that way, It was like way big and didn't have enough aeration and stuff, but he got it, and so I've been trying to get my hands on free fat to try it and see. Any supermarket's icing, it doesn't, they're all the same,
Do you see any value in taking brush that you just collect and you're not ready to make a compost pile? If you leave that brush, just sit over in a semi-compost pile and then take some of that to make your pile with.
So now, do you mean woody brush? Or
woody brush.
Okay. Woody brush, what I learned, and Jane can correct me if she thinks differently, what I learned it from the Lupkes. The Lupkes taught a controlled microbial composting class, which used to be like the acid test for reliable, it was incredibly consistent, but it was totally bacterial. Really bacterial, because they turned it all the time. They basically said any woody stuff that was less than a year old, you could compost and it would go away. So even if it was like a lot of woody brush, if it was the stuff that had grown that year, it'd probably work fine. Otherwise, it probably will take a long time to break down. But when I say that my thinking on compost has been changing, I just put tons of wood chips in that compost pile. I never used to do that. I used to always think keep the wood out, but I used to always be about turning the compost into the soil. We're no-till now. We don't turn anything into the soil. Because when I did that carbon nitrogen test through the waste analysis, and I didn't have any really high carbon material, even though I'd saved every bit of stocky stuff I could get, I went with wood chips because I wanted something to last there long enough to give it the structure and keep it running so that the fungi could get a chance to grow. Because otherwise, if it all breaks down, then that's what would stop an 8-week pile will be that it's just broken down. So then you can turn it and put it back on there, but it's not going to run nearly as long because there's no more structure. And that's a critical thing people miss when they're making compost, is you're using this stocky stuff not just to get the carbon nitrogen ratio, but to get the structure. And that's why I wonder about using paper. To me, it's like you're using up some of your structure, the structure you need, with something that gives no structure at all.
But if you get lots of humic acid, you'll have microstructure. That's what you need.
If you got, and so you're getting.
Just tear it. What kind of paper?
And I wouldn't use only paper. It would mat and provide.
Shredded paper, newspaper, just
layered. Yeah, I mean, colored newspaper. I'd wonder about.
It's usually soy ink.
Is it now? Is it pretty much reliably? Yeah.
Wood shavings, do they compact too much? Or?
Yeah, they're not ideal. Sawdust is not ideal, Yeah. The best stuff is the stuff that's ground up by the huge operations where they have the tub grinders, because that gives it a lot of surface area and more purchase for bacteria and stuff. But the truth is, now that we're not turning it in, you can just spread that composted wood chips on top. Let it take all of its time in the world. I mean, did you catch the Gabe Brown talk where he was talking about his secret to 8% organic matter in the soil?
Yes, but I don't remember what he said.
Puts wood chips out.
Yeah,
not a
there
lot.
Are people who are advocating put 2 feet of wood chips on your garden and plant in there. You're going to have a florist.
There's some very successful market garden in California that's doing that.
Wow.
So that's the fun thing about all this. All the rules change. We're learning all the time. We're constantly learning. 10, 15 years ago, were you worried about fungi?
Yeah, I'd been following Elaine since '82.
Okay,
10 years ago was.
I picked up on her in '97, and I didn't really get I didn't get that I wasn't getting the fungi in my compost, until much later.
Yeah, you don't know till you look.
Putting those wood chips right on top and just a thin layer like that is not going to pull too much nitrogen from your soil.
If they're not broken down, you need to volatilize them if they have oils in them, like cedar and pine, and they need to be soaked before you. I would have soaked we were soaking, but I would soak wood chips for 2 days or so before I put them in there. You know, I have a wood chip pile that's about 8 years old now, and it's ready.
Well, and that's a complete crapshoot because I've had other wood chip piles, the rainbow type wood chips, and they're gone in 8 years. There's nothing left.
Well,
Sometimes
I had somebody gave me some bags of, must have been hardwood.
The stuff you get from power companies that I haven't switched completely to Roundup and stuff, that's pretty gold. Because most of that is younger stuff because they're trimming, you know, and they're doing it in the summer, so you've got a lot of green stuff in there. And so that's pretty great for if you're going to do wood and composting. Martin Webster was regularly getting it all to break down. It's totally about the life that's around your pile. It's not the same ever. I've had some piles that have been there for 5-6 years, other piles gone in a year and a half. And it's just like, what fungi are there, what gets in there, what was in the mix, you know? There's no real say in how that's going to work.
Brown matter that we collect from our garden every day or so and put in a pile. What about the things like pulling up bolting plants, bolting greens or whatever, and so you have a lot of that at one time, but you're not ready to make a compost pile?
Well, my advice to home gardeners is to have a worm box or two if they need it. Make one big pile in the fall when you're cleaning up. Save your food for a while beforehand, but obviously you can't save all of it, but that'll take some pressure off your worm box.
Right.
You know, maybe then check out with your local coffee shops, get coffee grounds, make a big pile. I teach that pile because that's what people want. A bigger pile is definitely better as far as thermal mass and how long it's going to run. But you can make that work. If you want to have it, you know, if you're a home gardener and you want a contained thing, you can make that, and then right when you're ready to turn it, you can go ahead and make another one or take that apart, and all you need is one more to make the floor and flip it, you know.
So you would just keep all that green stuff in a pile, almost like just in a big pile of stuff, and then just take it as you need it?
Well, ideally, I wouldn't put it in a big pile because it'll be gone.
Well,
you'll make a mini compost pile, you know. Yeah. So I would like, you know, if I was trying to save it, I'd probably scatter it out and let it dry some, you know. Because otherwise, if you pile it up, it's going to, you know, you'll have an instant compost pile that won't be very balanced. It'll be very bacterial, you know. And I recommend that you let a few of those bolting plants actually go to flower.
Oh, we do.
Yeah.
We save our seeds.
Yeah,
we save
right,
them
yeah.
for decades.
So there's like, you know, there's always a lot of different ways to make compost, you know. And actually, what I'm showing here was developed just because people want to have a pile that more suits them. But if you don't make a pile that's immediately hot and immediately rapidly degrading that food, and you're putting food out in a pile like this, rats.
Right.
Guaranteed. Bears too. Bears are scarier. Rats are creepier. Rats are more persistent and more likely.
We got more bears than rats.
Yeah.
Well, we've been afraid to do it, composting our normal way here, because all of our neighbors, you know, not that they're any close by, but they're all saying, oh, be careful because all the bears are going to come to your compost pile.
Yeah, that's quite possible. If you made a really hot pile, I think the odds are good that it would degrade so quickly that the bears would, you know. Unless you were unlucky and they caught it the first night, you know.
Yeah, and the food scraps break down in like 24 hours, and the manure, there will be no odors in a pile that's hot in 24 hours.
That was revelatory to me when I took that composting class with the Lupkis, because they were using paunch manure. Now, have you ever smelled paunch manure?
I don't even know what it is.
It's what was inside the gut of the cow when it was killed.
Oh.
So it is as anaerobic as it can get. It was like incredible stink. And they put that pile together. Pardon?
Lupke?
The Lupkis, L-U-B-K-E. I'm not sure that I think that they're definitely a piece to learn from.
Yeah.
But I think that their system is pretty bacterial, you know.
They were putting clay in last I heard.
Yeah, they've always put clay in, but they tend to put the clay in a little later, and they don't put very much in. You know? And actually,
just makes it heavier.
Well, we did a test on compost tea to suppress late blight years ago. We got the tea from a guy named Donnie Fox, one of the earliest compost tea makers, and he followed the Lupke method, and his compost looked like red dirt. And we made tea, and although there's disagreements on how efficacious it was, because we had a trial where we allowed the controls to not be treated at all, so we had massive amounts of late blight. Even with that massive amounts of late blight, the control went down in 2 days, and it took like 3 weeks to kill the compost tea plants. So that was efficacious, and it was quite efficacious. You know? So I'm not sure that the clay doesn't have its place, but I haven't figured. For me, compost tea is like this ongoing mystery. We actually 2 times, about 3 years ago, totally controlled late blight with compost tea, completely accidentally, and it was compost tea that had been made, and then because it was so much to do, it was like sitting aerated in the tank, but still quite old. It started to smell funny to Marshall, so he gave it fish emulsion and molasses, and then he sprayed. So John Nielsen's theory is there was a bacterial bloom.
I would say so.
And then he sprayed, some tomatoes that weren't even purposely being grown. They were being grown for a biochar test. They weren't really. It was too late in the season. It was September, and we don't even think about late blight. But I walked by the next day, and there was obvious. Once you've killed late blight, you know what that looks like. I was like, Jeremy, do we have late blight? And he said, yeah, pretty bad. Every bit of it was dead. It's like I'm doing the exact same thing the next week, and because compost tea changes and people change and all that, he didn't get 100%, but he got like 95% kill. But that was the last time that we had tomatoes to try it on, and by the next year, our compost was different, our methods were different, and but it's out there. We can get there, but and I think the path is going to be like using microscopes and seeing what the life is in there, and tracking it all the way along. But that's, as Mayor has experienced, a lot of work. I mean, it's pretty hard to get that to do. Maybe a home gardener could do it, on a regular basis and track a small amount of tea and a few plants or something like that. But for our scale, we're still learning how to get there. We don't.
You could take one small thing.
Yeah, one small thing and check it. Yeah, but we can take a look at our brewer. It's an 85-gallon brewer here.
The more involved, the harder it is.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier using anaerobic compost. You could pull it into the pile. Where in this process would you use that?
If it was anaerobic, it's useless. It has no life in it. But I might have a big pile of it that could make a contribution. So next year when I make this pile, I'll sprinkle some in and get it used up and get it.
And
just
what
sort of
quantities would you
not
mix
so much
in with this? Where you're using these 5, 3, 1?
It doesn't really fit in anywhere except that I need to get rid of it.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah. So that's kind of the way we.
Yeah, it could add some.
But see,
Just
all
the
this is completely confusing to me because there was this kind of famous scofflaw up in Boone. You might have heard of him. Jay was his first name, and he was composting anaerobically. And he had a
Whole
site.
carcasses?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was at war with Diener, and finally Diener won. But it took a long time for them to win. I mean, he did it for years and years.
He was composting entire carcasses.
Entire carcasses.
You need anaerobic because you need acid to get the bones
Right.
and the teeth and the hoofs.
He was first letting the
Big
soldier
piles.
flies populate them completely, and then once they really hit them really hard, he would bury them. But when he took it out, and he would pile it up, and then it would go aerobic was the theory. And Dick McDonald used that stuff for compost tea and used it, but he used it on brassicas. But he said that the impact was incredible. I mean, so much so that somebody who got his master's degree monitoring brassicas, brassica pests, but he still didn't know the plants. And so he pulled up looking at the plants and thought they were like 2 weeks older. He had to count leaves to see how old they were because they were growing that fast.
I think there are other forces here also. If you're close to your plants and you get an inspiration, pay attention.
Well, if you believe it, I mean, it's just but there's way more to it, and and we're just learning stuff all the time. I mean, what we thought about compost 20 years ago is very different than what we think now, and I expect it to evolve and keep changing.
In a 90-minute presentation, you can't cover all that.
Yeah,
It's just,
absolutely.
Well, for the anaerobic stuff, though, is it detrimental just to
If it's got-
broadcast it out here? Very
I don't
lightly
think
and
so.
loosely?
No,
Would it
the
have-
sunshine will take care of it if it's in the sun.
But I
it'll
think
take
even
care
more
of it.
ideally would be to mulch it and let the life recolonize it.
Yeah, and
That
I
way
would
you're not
I would resend it through the.
frying it,
Unless
Mulch
it's if it was that hot, the pathogens will finally be dead too. So.
I mean, I remember one time my intern was helping me, it was dark, and I had made a compost pile, and there was a patch that was anaerobic. And I said, stay away from it. And it was dark, we shouldn't have been working, but we were trying to get stuff done. And he didn't stay away from it. And where he put that down, the plants were all fried the next day. I mean, they were just like, they were just like all that kind of gray, the leaves were graying, they were just like way.
It's very acidic, and you don't know what's in there is the problem. So you need to compost it if you're going to use it again, I guess. But the sun will destroy it also. So.
Anytime something goes wrong because you've got a situation that isn't tenable, then it doesn't matter who did it. It's the person in charge that says to do it that's at fault, I mean, I'm telling that story not to blame the person, but to make the point that it sure will fry the stuff, you know. And I mean, if I wasn't fried and working in the dark, I probably would have smelled it and said, whoa, whoa, what have you got there? But I wasn't really paying attention. I was trying to get done, you know. Get the compost top dressed on, cover it with mulch, and have something done, you know.
What do you use for mulch?
Lots of things, but we just learned, this is a little off topic I guess, but we just learned not to use straw if you're growing alliums, because straw, or even to grow grain cover crops before alliums, particularly garlic, because there's a mite, the wheat curl mite, that is on the straw. And normally in our climate it's totally controlled by heavy cold rains in the winter, but last fall, last summer, we didn't have those rains, and our garlic is the weirdest garlic this year. I mean, it may look pretty good to you guys, but it's nothing like what we normally have.
So
what else?
7:30-ish.
Okay.
So we have half an hour.
All right, well, so we'll show you how this would work. It's very important to have a pallet that actually has a solid bottom so that there's that airspace underneath. And then the next thing you do is you put stocky material on top of the pallet, and you pick your pallet with the smallest holes for your floor so that stuff doesn't fall through and clog the holes. And then you put a bunch of stocky material on the bottom. And then if you have enough stocky material in the pile, or proper bulk density, which is the fancy word for you know, getting the right amount of stocky material in there. And you can tell if you got it right if you take like a probe, and it's easy if you're in the big business of composting because you tend to have these big expensive thermometers, and so they're perfect. And if you have to force that in there, you don't have enough bulky stuff. You have the wrong bulk density. It's not going to breathe well. But if you can easily slide it out, another way to tell is if when you're turning it, if it's easy to turn, then you have the right bulk density. If it's heavy and hard to turn, then you don't have the right bulk density. And that took me years to learn. My mentor on that was John Nielsen, and he would come and check my pile with that thermometer and go, oh, still a little bit too dense. Oh, still a little too. And then one day he went, you know, and he just lit up. And that pile later on, when it was finished, he was like, this is aggregating. This is good stuff, Pat. You know, and I finally got it. So you have to have the right bulk density for this system to work, and that's the system that, you know, that's why it works that small. And you have to make sure that when you pile your stuff in, you don't cover the hole on the bottom, the holes around the bottom, because it has to be able to draw the cool air in through that, and with the chimney effect, pull the air up. And if it's too dense, it can't do it. So you have to have enough bulky material. If you've got that, and this is working fine with the wood chips. And what I would say to that is, you don't want to incorporate this compost without sifting the wood chips back out. But if you sift them back out, it's perfectly fine, and those wood chips will be wonderful for the next compost pile. They'll be pre-inoculated, and you know, someday they'll actually go away, but it'll take a while.
So what can you do if you've got a lot of black walnut around and the wood chips have got a lot of black walnut?
Well, if you compost it hot, I think you'll break that stuff down. You know? I'd sure try it though. If I composted it hot, I would then test it on something like a tomato that was sensitive and make sure. But I would think that those toxins would break down in a good compost pile. You know? I'd be surprised if it wouldn't.
I'd be scared. I'd make a path.
Yeah, really. Oak.
Oak is fine. Oak is perfectly fine, you know. Yeah, it's
Easy on the leaves if you're using oak leaves.
I'm not a big fan of leaves for the same reason as paper, because there's no structure in it, you know. I think leaves are wonderful in their own pile, and my theory is make that pile under a willow or an alder because they have both mycorrhizae. And then you know, those roots are going to grow up there to get the nutrients, and spores are going to happen, and you might well, I can't guarantee it, but you might well have, you know, leaf mold that has the spores of mycorrhizae in them. A warning about leaves: talk to your neighbors. Don't take leaves from people if you don't know what they put in it, because some people, when they're cleaning up, they're not just putting their leaves in there, they're putting their mugwort and their nutsedge and all that other stuff that you don't want to get. So you don't just take leaves from anywhere unless you're ready to deal with a lot of problems.
So leaves which are in the woods, you know, from last fall, they're halfly already kind of composted.
Yeah.
What's about those?
They're great.
They're great. They have already fungi and
there's going to be
fungi
fungi in there for sure. Yeah.
And okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
that's
good stuff.
a good stuff. Yeah,
That's good stuff. But Jane's right. Don't go robbing the woods. I mean, a little bit here and there is okay, but you don't want to, you know, get carried away. You know, you want those woods to stay healthy.
Yeah.
You know, should you ever want to make a lot of compost, the same system that's working there can be done with drainage pipes. the kind that are used for septic systems. And you want to have the holes facing up instead of down. And you want to make sure, once again, that the compost doesn't cover those holes. And you usually put something kind of in between them so they don't move when you're putting the stuff on your pipes. But you can make a huge pile and get the same kind of aeration, and it can run for a really, really long time at over 130. So it's actually passively aerated windrow system. It's the way to do large scale, actively aerated, well, passively aerated, but actually with, you know, the same impact as if it was actively aerated, you know. And so that's, do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know. I mean, this is aerated here actively with a fan, you know. And that's pricey, and you probably don't want to build one for a home thing, but if you decide in this fall you have a big garden and it's going to be much more than either this can contain, certainly more than that, then you might go with those pipes, you know, and they work really well. Also, a note, if you can, I always try to encourage people to buy together. I wish Fifth Season would carry a roll of it, but that cover for compost is ideal. It's a spun, yeah, it's a spun bound fabric. It's called Top Text. That particular piece is probably, what, I got it probably in 2003. It is like thick. It's spun bound fabric, yeah. You know, and there are lesser versions of it, but for what they charge, which is only like maybe 25% less than this, much better deal to get this, because the lesser versions don't hold up at all like the, you know. So, and that comes from a company called Intrusa, which is the company that sells stuff that is following the Lupkes. He went out and studied with them and came back, and Intrusa is Austrian, because they're Austrian, and USA, so that's where you can get it, you know. Okay, so let's look at this pile here for a minute. We made it 2 weeks ago, and we wanted to get it turned, and we couldn't really get to it for various reasons, so it sat not turned at all for about 12 days. And it was still running plenty hot because of all the structure that's in it. You know, there's just lots of stuff in there that's got structure, you know, lots of stalks, the wood chips, you know, loads of structure. And indeed,
What's in it? Manure?
Manure, and the manure we get, right, is the best manure in the world to get. But this is from Taproot Dairy, and supposedly they're going to change what they're doing, but at the moment they bed their cows with corn stalks. And so there's loads of this in there. And this is very slow to break down and gives those passageways, and yet it does break down in the end. You had something?
That thing, the V-shaped thing right there that I'm looking at?
John Nielsen and I came here, set up this compost bin system, said get the wood out, and in an attempt to get the wood out, they made that incredibly small thing, and that's too fine. It's way too slow.
It's like for potting mix.
Yeah, yeah. Even for potting mix, the way we're making our compost right now, and that level of sifting, it's too hot. It's too high in salts, you know. That's why we're doing this fungal thing over at the other place. But that with a bigger mesh on a truck is very fast, you know. No, you do it like that. You want the big stuff to roll off.
Yeah.
It's fitting in the back of the truck, and you want the big stuff to roll off and the little stuff to go in, and then the big stuff just goes back in your pile, you know. So it works really well. Or you use it as what we call Nutrimulch, you know.
Where did you have this pile cooking for those 12 days?
It was in a field over at Grandview at our other farm, you know, on pipes like I described, you know, covered with the Top Text, but not covered for quite a while because it was a lot of what's in this is stuff that came from a barn, and it was very, very dry. We literally stood there while we were loading it and watered it all the time. And then while Rocco was making the pile originally, I watered it. You know, we were there for hours, and I was doing nothing but watering. And I came back the next day, and it was just moist enough. But I knew with the sun and the wind, it would dry out. But also we were having thunder showers, so it was a better gamble to leave it open. And it had a decent moisture. Now, it's getting a little dry. Because the smaller the pile, the easier it is for it to dry out. And so I can't get any water out of this. It's not very far from being moist enough, but it's going to need to be watered, you know, before it will really compost right now. And so because it's been moved and it's starting to dry out, I reached in there and it's probably about 110. But in the field the other day, like last night actually, it was easily, you know, I've been doing this long enough, and we got a thermometer, we can check it. But I reached in it and it was like, that's at least 130, you know. So even at that size, you know, because it was the right ratio and it was piled up a little better, it wasn't spread out so much, it was still keeping its heat. And that was, I think, Monday. Was it Monday that you guys separated this out? Or was it Friday? Friday, yeah. So it sat that long and still was hot. You know, it would have died though because it's drying out, you know. But the key piece, I think, the key piece really to me for getting good compost is to get that right bulk density, you know. If you don't have the right bulk density, it's not going to breathe. What I'm struggling with now is how to ensure that that bulk density is going to be the kind of materials that'll be there long enough for it to go fungal, you know. And that, you know, I'm still learning about that, you know. I'm not sure, you know. I've never used wood chips in a pile, ever. You know, I learned early on not to use wood, and so wood chips, and so now I'm trying it, and we'll see. And this pile is being made for pasture. It's only going to be spread on top of a pasture, you know. So
you're going to sip that before you put it on the pasture.
Not at all, no. Because it's going on top of the soil. Right. So somebody's worried about that. You're not going to lose much nitrogen at all if your wood's on top, right? I mean, of course, there's going to be a little bit of activity right there at the interface, but there's just not enough surface area.
It's if you incorporate it.
If you incorporate it, then the fungi are just like, I'll take all the nitrogen, thank you, you know. And then it can be a problem, though. I mean, there's an easy solution for a home gardener, which once again is urine, you know. I literally had a neighbor who had put much too much woody manure on her garden and couldn't understand why it wasn't working. And I went up to it and looked at it and said, it's all this wood. And she said, oh my God, I ruined my garden. I said, no, just save your urine and put it on there. Called me back at the end of the summer, said we had incredible production, you know. And it's 10-to-1 dilution, you know. But it totally, you know, will solve that kind of woody problem.
That's
if you're
an important thing to say.
Yeah, it's very important, yeah. Yeah. Well, for compost, you don't need to do that, you know. So that's what I'm talking about. But when I'm talking about using it for counteracting too much wood, then you want 10-to-1 dilution. Though, I mean, there's a book called Liquid Gold, and she speculates that if your activity is good enough, you probably don't even need to do that, if there's enough life in your soil. Though I imagine it would be hard on the life in the soil. It's pretty high salt at that stage, you know. Anyway, oh, it's insane. I mean, we cannot afford to waste it anymore. The thing about peak oil is that that's not the peak we need to worry about. We need to worry about peak phosphorus. You know, phosphorus is way more critical to us than oil. I mean, we can live without oil, but we can't grow food without phosphorus, and we are wasting it like crazy. So that's, you know, we got to get there. I mean, really, we got to start treating all human waste like fertilizer, which is how it's totally intended to be. You know, that's how the world was designed, and it's not waste at all. Anyway, this system here was designed to handle horse manure, and we sometimes use cow manure too. But it's got a compressor, and it's set up on a timer to come on and run air, and it keeps the piles. If we took a thermometer to those piles in the center would be very hot. You know, indeed, I was managing it for a while, and my big struggle was to try and keep up with turning it so it wouldn't go to 180, which is scary. You can have piles catch fire. It can be.
What's in it?
It's basically mostly manure, and the manure with the corn stalk bedding, and then the garden waste from here. You know, that's it. And then we get brewer's waste, and we get pumice from the bold rock. And as much as we can use for animals, we use. Whatever we can't use goes in here. So some of that goes in every week too. And so the result of all that is that it's way bacterial. There's not nearly enough stalky material in there. It would be way. Pardon?
What is pumice?
Humus is the waste from making apple cider. Oh. Yeah, but it's a greater resource for us for feed. I mean, I would never compost something that I could use for feed, but for a home grower, if you can get access to it, and that's what you need, you know. I really don't think though that nitrogen should be a problem. There's so many sources of nitrogen. You know, to me, it's harder to come up with enough stalky material that gives you the right density than it is to come up with nitrogen. I mean, just coffee grounds, you name it, there's so many sources of nitrogen. You know, it's a lot of high nitrogen waste. And so for me, it's getting enough that you can slide a probe in there easily and have it be fluffy and go to turn it and not get worn out. The point about recalcitrant carbon is you can see a little bit of stalks here. There were huge amounts of stalks that we put in this pile. I mean, we put a lot of stalks in here, and they're 2 weeks and they're gone. You know, you know, and I was thinking, well, to me, it's not what I want. I want them to last longer. They kind of getting that stuff in so that it's all breaking down at the same time is what you're really aiming for, you know. But it's not all that easy to do sometimes. You know, you get surprised sometimes. When we first got here, the compost was being like 18. You know, the carbon nitrogen ratio was 18, and that's really too high for available nutrients for vegetables. And so we said, try to get it down to about 12. Well, now he's at 9. And it's just like, it's a point of pride to him. And what we can't convince him is 9's not so good. You know, we don't really want 9. There's a balance there, you know. 11 or 12 is pretty fine, but 9 is just going to end up being real high salt, and you have to turn it a ton to get it there, you know. And so it's just a matter of, you know, somebody adjusting what their identity and what they're doing, you know, to what's changed. And I was actually hearing that he was resistant. He was thinking, they were telling me he was making bad compost. You know, right? I told Kendra to tell him that when I took my compost to the Lookies and showed it to him, they said, well, you could recompost that or you could landfill it. You know? And at that time, I could make compost get hot. I could make it cook really well. You know, my plants grew really well with it, but it wasn't balanced. It didn't, you know, I'm sure it was just totally bacterial. And even then they were like, well, no, you know, I think what they would say is, I think the way they got there was they added that clay in and slowed it down that way. And
that clay humus complex, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's why they're doing it. They wanted it to be super fine clay. You know, it wasn't like you went and got clumpy clay and threw it in your pile. That wouldn't work at all. It's like the trick if you're trying to do that is to make a windrow clay in the fall and plant rye on it. And then because it's a windrow, it's going to freeze and thaw a lot, and that's going to help break it up. And then in the springtime, pull that rye up and shake it over your pile, and then you're going to get the fine clay, you know. And if you're trying to get clay in, you know. But even then, I would probably let the initial heat happen before I put the clay in, because it's really going to mess with your bulk density. But then as it's coming down, once it starts to drop below 130, you're not about bulk density anymore anyways. It's just curing out. And that's when I would probably turn it one more time, shaking that clay in, and then let it cure with the clay. And then I think you would get that complex, you know. And someday I'm going to try that too. I mean, there's a long list of things to try with compost. So, any questions about this part? It definitely works. I mean, that pile will run hot for a long, like I said, hard to keep it from hitting 180, you know. But you want to see the compost tea brewer? My intern, once again, intern story, right? Brought a brandywine tomato, and usually you bring brandywine tomato, you're also bringing disease because they get sick really easily, you know. So she brought a brandywine tomato, and it had a early blight on it. And it was, for some reason, 2003 was like the best year for early blight, you know, or the worst year. I mean, I guess you would say. It was terrible. It wasn't real heavy rains, but there were lots of light, misty rains and gray all the time. And so she actually left, and right after she left, all my solanacea were covered with early blight. And I freaked, and I had oxidate. I took oxidate and sprayed oxidate, and then I put the compost tea on, and it just went away.
Oh my gosh.
It just went away.
I've never heard about it going away before. I've never heard about it.
Went away.
It's there, and it goes away.
It totally was controlled. And it was controlled through the summer, and midway through the summer, I don't think I should be able to do this, but Omri pulled the oxidate. I'm sitting on $155 worth of stuff, and it's no longer considered organic. You know? And so I was mad about it. Eventually I found somebody who didn't care. Right. But I didn't use it. I stopped using it because I told my customers I follow NOP. Right. And so I just kept using the tea, which I got regularly every week from John and sprayed every week. And
Weekly.
Weekly. I sprayed it weekly, every Wednesday night. You know. So before it was even harder because in the morning before I went to market, I had to spray oxidate on everything. You know, the theory was you wipe it clean and then put this life that you want on it, right? I don't think you needed to wipe it clean really, because when I stopped, the control still happened. And so, of course, I'm thinking, oh, well, the early blight pressure isn't much. Come September, I had the only tomatoes in market. I literally had lines. I've never had lines before or after. I've never seen lines at anybody else's stand. But I had lines because I had lots of heirloom tomatoes, and I had stacks and stacks of them. And so I just was selling like crazy. And people were buying my seconds, you know, for salsa and stuff, you know. I mean, just like my co-farmers were sending people to me, which they never want to do. But I had the only tomatoes. Why? I can only believe it's because they all had the same problem with the early blight. It was everywhere, you know. And come September 15th, which is my birthday, so I remember really well that oftentimes in Silo, nowadays it's much less as we get warmer, but back in the 90s, and this was the early 2000s, many a birthday was spent covering things and rushing around, digging things up and saving things from a frost, you know. Pretty exhausting for a farm, you know. So I remember that really well. And I think I'm a weatherman like most farmers, you know. And I know that when a big front comes through that time of year and there's a big rain and then it's predicted to be clear the day after, that frost is really likely. And so my birthday's coming up. There's a big front coming through. It's like, I'm not spraying anymore. I'm done, you know. And I just said, no, John, I don't want any more. I'm done, you know. I didn't spray. I was wrong. You know, there wasn't any frost. A warm front came in. By the end of the week, all my plants were dead from early blight. You know?
Just like what?
Late blight.
Early blight. Early blight. This is early blight. This is an early blight. You know, we controlled the late blight. You know, twice with the tea that we used, and then we did a test with this Downy Fox tea, and it had a good efficacy. But the complete control for a whole season was with early blight, which is not nearly as bad a beast as late blight. You know, it's a problem, but it's not as bad. But that tea completely controlled it. You know.
What about using compost tea preventively on just everything across the garden?
We do. We spray it all the time. Yeah.
On a weekly basis?
Well, right now it's not happening weekly, and I'm seeing problems that I wouldn't see otherwise.
So you think weekly is fine with compost tea?
I know weekly is fine. We did it all the time.
Cool. Okay.
Perfectly fine.
If
You know?
you have a 5-gallon bucket, it's easy to make every 24 hours another 5 gallons.
Yeah.
It becomes part of the routine. It's really easy.
And you know, if you think you need a feed, then, and a lot of people don't get this. You know, I say, okay, so then you can do a foliar feed with the compost tea. It's going to be way more effective, right? And you want to make sure and do it in the morning or in the evening when the stomata are open, right? And then people will say, well, it's not. I'm not noticing any difference. I'm saying so. And the formulas I give have a little bit of fish in the tea, and so I'll say, well, did you tank mix fish with your tea? And they go, no, it's in my compost tea. It's like, oh, that fish is gone. The microbes ate it. There's no fish left then. You're not giving any nutrients out with that tea unless you're tank mixing it right when you spray. So
are you saying fish emulsion?
We use the fish hydroslate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even for that?
Get where?
My favorite source is Brown's, which is big because you can get a good price, but they actually sell pretty small units. They're making it out of trout, you know. They don't add the seaweed in, so then we buy Maxi Crop and add that in too, you know. But it's local and not, you know, I'm not too happy about how we fish the ocean, so I'd rather use trout food, you know, that, you know, they actually, I think, are making their own feed too. I know that some of them are now making their own feed, so they're possibly not even using fish in the feed, which would be great, you know. But you don't need to do that necessarily. It's only if you feel like you need a feed, you know. But if you do it, you get incredible productivity. I mean, just amazingly productive if you're doing that, you know. And my whole thing is if you're spraying,
Might as well. Tank mix. Yeah.
Yeah, tank mix, and indeed we control vine borer by spraying soap and BT twice a week. Well, always one of those sprays is with the compost tea. So we wait to spray the squash last, you know, and then we put our BT and soap in there, and all you gotta do is spray the bottom leaves. But if you're spraying the feed too, then you get the whole plant. And the benefit of that is the soap is also getting the baby squash bugs. So you tend to get really huge squash that make lots of squash, and you don't get vine borers, so they go for a long time until the downy mildew gets them, and you're done. You know.
Well, so the compost tea doesn't work on downy mildew.
Well, it's, you know, my experience with tea, and you could tell me what you think too, is that we don't have standard enough tea. I mean, sometimes it does, but it's just a crapshoot. And the worst fungi to deal with aren't fungi; they're the water molds, and they're mean. They're tough. They're very adaptive. They're incredibly virulent, and downy mildew is one of those, you know. We have had impact with compost tea at some times, but in a bad downy mildew year, basically we just get our butts kicked, you know. I mean, there's not, you know, you grow resistant plants is the best thing, you know, use genetics, you know. But we use the tea. We have a whole spray routine. We use tea, we use regalia, we use double nickel, both of which are raising the phenol levels or some other level of resistance on the leaves, you know. And then we also use things like serenade. When we get to the heavy fungi time,
Use serenade.
We use serenade in rotation with sonata. We used to use oxidate until Michael Phillips talked about studies showing that the destruction of diversity was actually causing more disease problems. You know, I don't know. I probably would only use oxidate if I thought, well, the plants are gone if I don't use it. You know, but it's about a mix. I mean, we usually manage to harvest tomatoes through the season. We tend not to lose them in late blight. But
you're not counting the ones in the greenhouse that are.
Yeah, no, not counting those. But we don't grow heirlooms outside.
Right.
We just don't, you know. Right. It's just not worth it. We grow the NC State, you know, resistant varieties, and they give us good performance if we spray too. And the compost tea is a piece of that spraying thing, you know. And it's a significant piece, and it's got, I mean, 2 years ago, our pathologist, and I love her, she's great. She just shares information incredibly, but she's got no faith in organic. And we had Fusarium on our tomatoes in the greenhouse, and I said, I'm going to try trichoderma and compost tea, and she said, it won't work. And it stopped that disease cold. I mean, I literally left the last infected plant in to see if it was going to, you know, move out again. And that plant never recovered. It didn't make any more tomatoes, really, but the plant stayed there all year, and there was no more infection.
What'd she say?
I actually never, I just sent her an email, but she didn't really respond, you know. But, I mean, and she's not the enemy at all. She just wasn't ever trained to believe in it.
Right, I know.
They can only give research-based recommendations, you know. She's actually incredibly cooperative and tries to give me all the information she can, but she has no faith that what I'm doing is going to work, you know. But I don't need faith. I have to, because I can't use what she's
You have faith.
Yeah. Well, even if I don't have faith, I still have to do it because it's the only option.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes I do things I don't think are going to work, but it's my best practice, and I've got no choice because otherwise,
Try it.
I'm just giving up and walking away. You know, and indeed, there was a year that I gave up and walked away. In 2003, actually, I don't know if people remember, it was an incredibly wet year. Actually, I was writing for the Express, and they actually quoted me. It was something like mold being, I forget what it was, but just talking about how wet it had been and what was happening, you know, to the tomatoes and stuff. And I walked away. It was been like, you know, every time I tried to spray Serenade or compost tea, it started raining. You know, and I mean, what do you do? I mean, if you can't get your stuff to stay on, so I just didn't go out to my farm for 10 days. I just couldn't stand to look at it. It was just so wet. It rained every day. It rained almost all day every day. You know,
And silos.
and lo and behold, when I went out to look at it, my tomato plants were all still alive because I'd used Serenade. All the fruit was blighted, but the plants were alive. And there was time for the sungolds to come back in. I actually got sungolds. They didn't taste like much because there was hardly any foliage left. But, you know, and indeed, I taught Troy's greenhouse about it. And now Burnsville's like a major center for Serenade sales because everybody got that Serenade works. I've since learned that Serenade too is, you know, you need to mix everything up. You know, and
that's another bacteria, right? You can mix that maybe with your compost.
I'm sorry, what?
That's also bacteria.
Yeah, it's Bacillus subtilis. Yeah.
So you'd be comfortable mixing that in with your compost tea and spraying it?
Well, actually, I won't say who said it because I think they actually have it like patented, so you're not supposed to. But maybe not. If you're going to do that, you brew it with glycerin for your food. Glycerin feeds Bacillus subtilis. Huh. Yeah. So yes, you can brew Serenade. We haven't tried. We're not there. But, yeah. I mean I learned that at a conference, a tea conference that I went to, that when they found out I was coming, they had me speak. But you know, I actually learned more than I shared. You know, except for the fact that I've had these moments of efficacy. I think that we will get there. We will eventually learn how to use tea, but I think it's only going to be with microscopes. You know, and learning to make compost that is exactly what we need. You know, and actually, every time you put it out, looking at it so you know what was in it, and then you see how it worked. Right. Would that we had seen what the tea that Marshall sprayed that first time had in it, you know? I mean, then we could have tried to get back there. Because it totally worked. It was 100% kill from compost tea. You know? And that's, you know, years ago I joked at a gathering of CFSA people that there was going to be a statue to me in Burnsville next to Ottaway Burns, and it was going to be, he cured compost tea, he cured lake blight with compost tea. And John Nielsen was in the same thing. He said, my statue is going to be up there too. I think both of us are never expecting to see our statues at this point. You know? I don't think we're going to figure it out in our lifetimes, but I think it can be done. Right. And I think it's the right path, you know, and I think someday that garden centers will be making tea that really works. You know, they'll get the people want, you know, somebody will do it and get results, and people will only buy there, and then it'll be a high paying position. This is my world, you know, and they won't have the poisons for sale, you know. So
advertise like they do for police, state troopers and whatnot, that you can come and get free coffee, but the garden center people can come to the workshop free or something that would get. Well, I mean,
we always do it. I mean, we literally mean that. We actually say always that, you know, you don't ever not come because you can't afford it.
Yeah, I know that.
And like, I encourage anybody that's sharing information to come and not pay.
Target them.
You know, yeah. I mean, extension agents, anybody that's teaching, you know, if you're teaching and there's a moment of hesitation about paying, don't pay. You know, and you know, if you're teaching in a way that's got a similar attitude, then don't pay, period, because you're probably not making very much money anyway. You know, so anyway, any questions about the compost tea? There are various recipes, but I'm not going to try and give you one right now. But you can look up Dr. Elaine Ingham, and I think she still has versions of the Compost Tea manual online. And there's lots of different recipes in there. You know, we've kind of tweaked ours over the time.
So if you're not there with your compost, is there anywhere you would buy?
I used to say McEnroe. I used to say McEnroe, but now McEnroe's all over the place, so I don't know that I would say it. There's this stuff you can buy from Peaceful Valley Farm called Alaska Humus, and so it's basically ancient stuff, but it's got a really good microbial mix, you know. And what else?
Nothing at Fifth Season.
I mean, you looked at Danny Dumpster's stuff. What's it like?
I haven't looked at it. I invited him to come tonight. I taught his daughter
he's so
piano
lovely.
last
God,
year.
I was going to ask you about him.
Talked it up big, and he didn't do anything for it. And I invited him to come tonight.
Yeah. He uses a fair amount of wood in his stuff, and I understand why for bulking. But I've got no idea what his compost is like. I know that.
I have an idea.
Uh-huh.
I've looked at stuff, not his, but it's. If you're not specifically trying to get fungal content, it won't show up.
I'll pre-treat my compost from my farm with a product that has these microbes in it and let it, you know, so on Monday I'll mix it up, cover it, stick it in the cellar, and by Thursday I'll throw it all together in the brewer and spray Friday.
I see. So you're inoculating to ensure you have the microbes.
Yes.
And the compost is just a good home for them.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. That'll work too. I mean, you can do that, you know. We get decent compost tea, but it's not fungal at all. We're not making fungal compost. You know?
Yeah, this is actually beautifully fungal. On Thursday, as you can see, the spores have germinated and it's just getting fuzzy.
And is it cost effective?
It is. Earth Fort is a company out west.
They're associated with Elaine,
right?
They bought it from Elaine.
They bought it from Elaine. Well, I get their Provide, which has two kinds of bacteria and then a fungal source as well, and then Revive, which is the fungal food and the bacterial food, and mix it up with that. Some humic acid.
So how much to make how many gallons?
Oh, I have a 55-gallon brewer and about 7 or 8 pounds of compost, and then, you know, a couple ounces of here, a couple ounces there of these products mixed up, and then slap them in the brewer in big tea bags.
Roughly how much does it cost you to do that? Is it something farmers can afford to do?
Let me see. A box this big of that Provide is $30, and it takes a couple ounces per brew. So
you probably get half a summer out of a box.
Yeah. It's not bad.
That's totally that's we'll look into that one. You know?
That's Earth Fort.
Or Earth Fort.
Yeah. Yeah, actually.
FORT.
If you would send the name to Pat at Living Web Farms, we'll put the resource up on, you know, put the details. We'll put the resource up on
the video too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, really, I'll put that in my plan.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Anyway, I think that's probably about it, unless there's questions.
Yeah, that's cool.